Sarah Martinez had always believed that kindness was the most powerful force in the world. At 28, she worked as a social worker in the rough neighborhoods of downtown Portland, but her real passion lay in feeding the homeless children who wandered the streets like lost souls. Every evening after her shift, she would pack her small Honda Civic with sandwiches, warm soup, and blankets, driving through the darkest corners of the city where most people feared to go. The children she encountered were different from the typical homeless youth. There was something haunting about their pale skin and the way they moved with an otherworldly grace. Their eyes held depths that seemed far too ancient for their young faces. Most people avoided them, crossing the street when they saw the small group huddled together near the abandoned warehouse on Elm Street. But Sarah saw only hungry children in need of care. Marcus, Elena, and Gabriel were the three she encountered most often. Marcus appeared to be around 12, with jet black hair that fell across his forehead and eyes that seemed to change color depending on the light. Elena, perhaps 10 years old, had platinum blonde hair that glowed almost silver in the moonlight, and she rarely spoke above a whisper. Gabriel, the youngest at what appeared to be 8, had auburn curls and a mischievous smile that could charm anyone, though there was something unsettling about the way his canine teeth seemed slightly longer than normal. Sarah first met them on a rainy Tuesday evening in October. She had been making her usual rounds when she spotted the 3 children sitting under a torn tarp behind Murphy's grocery store. They were soaking wet, shivering, and clearly hadn't eaten in days. Without hesitation, she approached them with her bag of food and warm coffee. "Hey there," she said gently, crouching down to their level. "I brought some sandwiches and hot soup. Are you hungry?" The children exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes without words. Marcus, apparently the leader, stepped forward cautiously. His movements were fluid, almost cat-like, and Sarah noticed he barely made a sound as he walked. "You're not afraid of us?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying a slight accent she couldn't quite place. Sarah smiled warmly. "Why would I be afraid of you? You're just kids who need help." Elena's eyes widened at this response, and she whispered something to Gabriel in a language Sarah didn't recognize. The younger boy giggled, revealing those unusually sharp teeth, but Sarah attributed it to genetics and poor dental care. "Most people cross the street when they see us," Gabriel said, his voice bell-like and clear. "They say we're different, wrong somehow." Sarah's heart broke at the pain in his young voice. "Well, they're mistaken. Everyone deserves kindness and care, especially children. Here, take these sandwiches. I made them fresh this afternoon." As she handed out the food, Sarah noticed several peculiar things about the children. They moved with incredible coordination, as if they could sense each other's thoughts. Their skin was unusually cold to the touch, which she assumed was due to exposure to the harsh weather. Most strangely, they seemed reluctant to eat the food immediately, instead sniffing it carefully and exchanging those meaningful looks again. Marcus finally took a bite of his sandwich, chewed slowly, and nodded to the other 2. Only then did Elena and Gabriel begin eating. They consumed the food with careful, measured bites, as if they were forcing themselves to swallow. "This is very kind of you," Elena said softly. "We are not used to such generosity." There was something formal about the way she spoke, as if English wasn't her first language, though she had no accent. Sarah made a mental note to look into their backgrounds and see if they might be immigrants who had fallen through the cracks of the system. Over the following weeks, Sarah made it her mission to visit the children every evening. She brought them food, clean clothes, and medical supplies for their various cuts and bruises. What puzzled her was that their injuries seemed to heal remarkably quickly. A deep cut on Marcus's arm completely disappeared within 2 days, leaving not even a scar. The children began to trust her more, though they remained secretive about their past. They claimed to have no memory of their parents or how they came to be living on the streets. Social services had no record of them, which wasn't entirely unusual for homeless youth, but their complete absence from any system was concerning. "We've always been together," Gabriel explained one evening as Sarah handed him a warm jacket. "For as long as we can remember, it's just been the 3 of us." "But someone must have taken care of you when you were younger," Sarah pressed gently. "Who taught you to speak so well? You're all very articulate for children who've been living on the streets." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. We learn quickly. We've had to survive. Sarah noticed that the children never seemed to sleep when she visited them. No matter what time she arrived, whether it was just after sunset or close to midnight, they were always awake and alert. She assumed they had developed insomnia from the stress of street life, but their energy levels never seemed to flag. As November approached, Sarah became increasingly worried about the children's welfare during the coming winter. She had been working with her supervisor, Janet Rodriguez, to find temporary housing for them, but every shelter they contacted claimed to have no space or cited policy issues that prevented them from taking in children with no documentation. "There's something different about those kids," Janet warned Sarah during one of their weekly meetings. "I've been doing this work for 15 years, and I've never encountered children quite like them. The shelter directors get nervous when I describe them. It's like they know something we don't." Sarah dismissed Janet's concerns as prejudice and continued her evening visits. The children had become the highlight of her day, and their gratitude for her simple acts of kindness filled her with purpose. She had started bringing them books and was amazed at how quickly they absorbed the material. Gabriel read at a high school level despite appearing to be only 8 years old, and Elena displayed an understanding of history that rivaled most college students. One particularly cold evening in late November, Sarah arrived at their usual meeting spot to find the children huddled together, looking more distressed than she had ever seen them. Marcus was pacing back and forth, his movements agitated, while Elena sat with her arms wrapped around Gabriel, who was trembling. "What's wrong?" Sarah asked immediately, setting down her bag of supplies and approaching them with concern. "Someone has been watching us," Marcus said, his voice tight with worry. "Following us, we can sense them, but we cannot see who it is." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the weather. "Watching you? For how long?" "3 nights now," Elena whispered. "They stay in the shadows, never coming close enough for us to see clearly, but we know they're there." Gabriel looked up at Sarah with fear in his ancient young eyes. "What if it's someone who wants to hurt us? What if they want to take us away from each other?" Sarah's protective instincts kicked in immediately. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Have you considered that it might be someone else trying to help? Maybe another social worker or a police officer doing welfare checks?" Marcus shook his head vigorously. "No, this is different. This presence, it feels familiar somehow, but also dangerous, like something from a half-remembered dream that might be a nightmare." That night, Sarah stayed with the children longer than usual, keeping watch while they huddled together for warmth. She saw nothing unusual, but couldn't shake the feeling that they were indeed being observed. Several times she thought she caught movement in her peripheral vision, but when she turned to look, there was nothing there but shadows and the gentle sway of tree branches in the wind. As the weeks progressed, Sarah noticed changes in the children's behavior. They became more anxious, jumping at sudden sounds and insisting on meeting in different locations each night. Their appetite, which had never been robust, seemed to diminish further. They picked at the food she brought them, eating just enough to be polite but clearly struggling with each bite. "Are you feeling sick?" Sarah asked Elena one evening, noticing the girl's increasing pallor. "You've been eating less lately." Elena exchanged a quick glance with Marcus before responding. "The food is wonderful, Sarah. It's just we're not used to eating so much. We have small appetites." This explanation didn't satisfy Sarah, who had noticed that despite eating very little, the children never seemed to grow weaker or more malnourished. If anything, they appeared to have more energy as the winter deepened and the nights grew longer. December brought the first serious snowfall, and Sarah's concern for the children reached a new level. She had been unsuccessful in finding them shelter, and the warehouse where they usually took refuge was barely protection against the harsh weather. She decided to take matters into her own hands and began researching temporary guardianship options that might allow her to house them herself. It was during this research that she discovered something that chilled her to the bone. While searching through missing persons databases, she found 3 faces that looked remarkably similar to Marcus, Elena, and Gabriel. The missing children reports were dated over 50 years ago. Sarah stared at her computer screen in disbelief. The resemblance was uncanny, but it had to be a coincidence. Perhaps the children were related to these missing persons from decades past. Families often shared strong physical traits across generations. Still, the discovery unsettled her enough that she printed out the missing persons reports and tucked them into her purse. She told herself she was being ridiculous, but something about the children's timeless quality and their mysterious past was beginning to make her question everything she thought she knew about them. That evening, as she drove through the snow-covered streets to meet the children, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. Every few blocks she thought she saw the same dark sedan in her rear-view mirror, but whenever she tried to get a better look at the driver, the car would turn down a side street or disappear into traffic. When she reached the children's new meeting spot behind the old library, they were waiting for her, as always, but their demeanor was different. They seemed excited, almost electric with anticipation, rather than their usual calm composure. "Sarah," Marcus said as she approached, his voice urgent, "tonight is different. Tonight you need to leave earlier than usual." "Why? What's happening?" she asked, immediately concerned. Gabriel bounced on his toes, his eyes brighter than she had ever seen them. "Father is coming home." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. In all the months she had known them, the children had never mentioned any family members. They had claimed to be orphans with no memory of parents or guardians. "Father?" she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. "You've never mentioned having a father before." Elena smiled for the first time in weeks, and Sarah noticed again how sharp her canine teeth appeared in the streetlight. "We haven't seen him in so long. We thought he had forgotten about us, but he's been watching, making sure we were safe." "The person who's been following you," Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. "That's your father?" Marcus nodded, his excitement barely contained. "He's been testing us, seeing if we've learned to survive on our own, and we have, with your help. You've been so kind to us, Sarah. You've shown us that not all humans are afraid of what they don't understand." The word humans struck Sarah as an odd choice, but before she could question it, a figure emerged from the shadows between the library buildings. At first, Sarah could only make out a tall silhouette, but as the man stepped into the circle of streetlight, she gasped. He was devastatingly handsome in a way that seemed almost supernatural. His hair was black as midnight and fell to his shoulders in waves. His skin was pale as moonlight, and his eyes were the deepest shade of blue she had ever seen, so dark they appeared almost black. He wore an expensive-looking long coat that billowed around him as he moved, and despite the snow and ice, his footsteps made no sound. Most striking of all was the way the children reacted to his presence. Marcus, Elena, and Gabriel immediately straightened, their casual, childlike demeanor replaced by something that resembled military formality. They stood in a line, their heads bowed slightly, waiting. "Children," the man said, and his voice was like velvet over steel, smooth and beautiful but with an underlying power that made Sarah's knees weak. "I have watched and I am pleased. You have learned discretion and patience." His gaze shifted to Sarah, and when their eyes met, she felt as though the world had tilted on its axis. There was something ancient and powerful in those dark blue depths, something that spoke of centuries rather than mere decades of experience. "And you," he said, addressing Sarah directly, "have shown kindness to my offspring when others would have turned away in fear. For this, you have my gratitude." Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Your children?" "But they said they were orphans." A smile played at the corners of the man's mouth, and Sarah caught a glimpse of teeth that were definitely not human. "Did they? How creative of them." Children do sometimes forget to mention important details about their family circumstances. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, though part of her was beginning to suspect an answer that her rational mind refused to accept. "I am Nathaniel Blackwood," he replied with a slight bow that seemed to belong to another century. "And you are Sarah Martinez, the guardian angel who has watched over my children in my absence." The way he said her full name sent chills down Sarah's spine. She had never told the children her last name, and yet this man spoke it with complete certainty. "How do you know my name?" she asked, taking a small step backward. "I know many things. Nathaniel replied. "I know that you work for the Department of Children and Family Services. I know that you live alone in a small apartment on Pine Street. I know that you have spent every evening for the past 2 months bringing food and comfort to my children, asking nothing in return." The children watched this exchange with rapt attention, their faces glowing with happiness at their father's return. But Sarah was beginning to feel deeply unsettled by the entire situation. "If you're their father, where have you been?" she demanded, finding her courage. "These children have been living on the streets, cold and hungry. What kind of parent abandons their children like that?" Nathaniel's expression darkened, and for a moment Sarah saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. "Abandons? Is that what you think I did?" Marcus stepped forward quickly. "Father, Sarah doesn't understand our ways. She meant no disrespect." "No," Nathaniel said, his voice softening as he looked at his son. "She speaks from concern for your welfare. It is admirable." He turned back to Sarah. "I did not abandon them. I was ensuring their safety while I dealt with certain complications that arose from our previous living situation." "What kind of complications?" Sarah pressed, though every instinct was telling her to leave immediately. "The kind that required me to eliminate certain threats to my family," Nathaniel replied matter-of-factly. "Threats that no longer exist, which is why I am free to return to my children." The casual way he spoke of elimination sent ice through Sarah's veins. Combined with the children's unusual characteristics, their apparent agelessness, and the supernatural quality of this man's presence, pieces of an impossible puzzle were beginning to form a picture she didn't want to acknowledge. "Sarah," Gabriel said, approaching her with his characteristic innocent smile, "thank you for taking care of us. You've been like a mother to us when we needed one most." The pure gratitude in his voice broke through Sarah's growing fear. Whatever this family was, whatever secrets they held, the children genuinely cared for her. She could see it in their faces, feel it in the way they moved closer to her, as if seeking comfort from her presence. "Will you stay with us a little longer?" Elena asked softly. "Father would like to show his appreciation for your kindness." Nathaniel nodded. "Indeed. It has been many years since I encountered a human with such genuine compassion. Such individuals are rare." Again, that subtle emphasis on the word human that suggested Sarah was something other than what he was. She looked around at the 4 faces watching her expectantly and realized that whatever choice she made in this moment would change her life forever. "I should go," she said finally, her voice barely steady. "It's late and you all need time together as a family." "Of course," Nathaniel agreed smoothly. "But perhaps we could meet again soon? There is much I would like to discuss with you, Sarah Martinez. You have become important to my children, which makes you important to me." As Sarah gathered her things with trembling hands, she felt the weight of 4 pairs of eyes watching her every movement. When she looked up, Nathaniel was studying her with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. "Until tomorrow evening," he said, and it sounded less like a suggestion than a gentle command. Sarah nodded numbly and walked back to her car, acutely aware that they continued to watch her until she drove away. As she made her way home through the snowy streets, her mind raced with questions and half-formed theories that all led to one impossible conclusion: the missing persons reports from 50 years ago. The children's ageless appearance and unusual characteristics, their sharp teeth and nocturnal habits, their reluctance to eat normal food and their impossibly quick healing, and now a father who moved like shadow and spoke of eliminating threats with casual ease. Sarah parked outside her apartment and sat in her car for a long time, staring at the falling snow and trying to convince herself that there had to be a rational explanation for everything she had witnessed. But deep in her heart, she knew that rational explanations were no longer sufficient. She had been feeding and caring for children who were not entirely human, and now their father had returned, a father who clearly knew far more about her than any stranger should, and who spoke of their meeting again as if it were inevitable. As she finally made her way upstairs to her apartment, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her simple mission of kindness to homeless children had somehow entangled her in something ancient and dangerous. Something that would test not only her courage but her very understanding of what was possible in the world. The snow continued to fall outside her window as she sat at her kitchen table, staring at the missing persons reports she had printed earlier. 3 children reported missing in 1972 who bore an uncanny resemblance to Marcus, Elena, and Gabriel. Children who, if they were still alive today, would be in their 60s. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to push away the impossible truth that was crystallizing in her mind. But even as she attempted to deny it, she knew that tomorrow evening she would return to meet them again. Because whatever they were, the children needed her, and she had never been able to turn her back on a child in need, even if that child might not be human at all. Sarah spent the entire next day in a state of nervous anticipation mixed with dread. She had barely slept, her mind churning with memories of the previous evening and trying to process what she had witnessed. Every rational part of her brain insisted that there had to be logical explanations for the children's unusual characteristics and their mysterious father's appearance. But a deeper, more primitive part of her consciousness whispered that she had stumbled into something far beyond normal human experience. At work, she found it impossible to concentrate on her regular caseload. Janet Rodriguez noticed her distraction during their morning meeting and pulled her aside afterward. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Janet said with concern. "Is everything okay? You're not having problems with those street kids again, are you?" Sarah hesitated, unsure how to explain her situation without sounding completely insane. "Their father showed up last night," she said finally. "The children aren't orphans after all." Janet raised an eyebrow. "That's good news, isn't it? If he's a responsible parent, maybe we can get them proper housing and support services." "Maybe," Sarah said non-committally, though nothing about Nathaniel Blackwood struck her as conventional or easily categorized by social services. As evening approached, Sarah found herself torn between professional obligation and growing personal fear. Her job required her to ensure the children's welfare, but her instincts warned her that meeting with their father again might put her in danger. Still, the thought of Marcus, Elena, and Gabriel waiting for her in the cold was enough to overcome her hesitation. She packed her usual bag of food and supplies, though she suspected the children's eating habits might change now that their father had returned. As she drove through the darkening streets, she noticed that the city felt different somehow, charged with an energy she couldn't identify. The children were waiting at their usual spot behind the library, but they were not alone. Nathaniel stood behind them, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the lamplight. He had changed from his heavy coat into a more casual dark sweater and jeans, but somehow this made him seem more approachable rather than less intimidating. "Sarah!" Gabriel called out, running toward her car as she parked. "You came back!" The pure joy in his voice made Sarah's heart ache. Whatever these children were, their affection for her was genuine, and she found herself smiling despite her nervousness. "Of course I came back," she said, hugging Gabriel as he threw his arms around her waist. "I promised I would take care of you." Marcus and Elena approached more sedately, but their faces showed the same happiness. Behind them, Nathaniel watched with an expression that was difficult to read. "I hoped you would return," he said as Sarah distributed sandwiches to the children. "There is much we need to discuss." "Yes, there is," Sarah agreed, surprised by her own boldness. "Starting with who you really are and what these children really are." Nathaniel smiled, and again Sarah caught a glimpse of those elongated canine teeth. Direct. "I appreciate that quality." "Very well, let us speak plainly." He gestured for her to sit on a nearby bench, and the children arranged themselves around them in a protective circle. Sarah noticed that they seemed to be listening for something beyond normal hearing range, their heads tilted in concentration. "What do you know of my kind?" Nathaniel asked without preamble. Sarah's heart began to race. "Your kind? Come now, Sarah, you're an intelligent woman. You've spent weeks observing my children. You've noticed their unusual characteristics. The rapid healing, the nocturnal habits, the dietary preferences, the enhanced physical abilities. What conclusion have you drawn?" Sarah's mouth felt dry as cotton. "I found missing persons reports. From 1972, 3 children who look exactly like Marcus, Elena, and Gabriel." Nathaniel nodded approvingly. "Excellent research." Yes, those reports were filed when my children first disappeared from their previous lives. It was necessary to relocate them when their nature began to manifest more obviously. Their nature, Sarah repeated faintly. They are vampires, Sarah, as am I. We are what your folklore calls the undead, though we prefer to think of ourselves as differently alive. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah found that she wasn't as shocked as she should have been. On some level, she had already accepted this impossible truth, even if her conscious mind had refused to acknowledge it. That's impossible, she said weakly, but even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't. Elena moved closer to her, reaching out to take Sarah's hand. It frightened us, too, when we first understood what we were, but Father helped us learn to live with our nature. You were turned? Sarah asked, looking at the children with new eyes. But you're so young, we were turned when we were young, Marcus confirmed. But that was over 50 years ago. We stopped aging the day we died and came back. We don't hurt people, Sarah. Father taught us to control our hunger, to find other ways to survive. Other ways? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Animal blood mostly, Nathaniel explained matter-of-factly. The occasional blood bank donation that goes missing. We've learned to exist without taking human lives. It's not easy, but it's possible with discipline and proper guidance. Sarah looked down at Gabriel's cherubic face pressed against her arm and tried to reconcile the image of this sweet child with what she was being told. Why are you telling me this? Why risk exposing yourselves? Because you've already guessed the truth, Nathaniel said, and because you've earned the right to know. You've shown kindness to my children when the rest of the world turned away from them. That kind of courage and compassion is rare. But also because we need your help, Marcus added quietly. Sarah felt a chill of apprehension. What kind of help? Nathaniel's expression grew serious. There are others of our kind who do not share our philosophy about coexisting peacefully with humans. They view mortals as nothing more than food sources, and they have recently become aware of my children's existence. The threats you mentioned eliminating, Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. Some of them. But there are more coming. They see my children as abominations because of their youth and my teaching them to resist their natural predatory instincts. They want to either corrupt them or destroy them. Elena's grip on Sarah's hand tightened. We're in danger and Father can't protect us alone. Not from all of them. I still don't understand how I can help, Sarah said, though she was beginning to suspect where this conversation was leading. You work within the human social services system, Nathaniel explained. You have access to safe houses, temporary housing, witness protection programs. You can help us disappear into legitimate identities while the threat is dealt with. Sarah's mind reeled at the implications. You're asking me to falsify documents, to lie to my colleagues, to abuse my position for personal gain. We're asking you to save 3 children's lives, Gabriel said softly, looking up at her with those ancient young eyes. The moral complexity of the situation was staggering. Everything Sarah believed about right and wrong was being challenged by circumstances she could never have imagined. How could she explain to Janet or her other colleagues that she needed emergency housing for 3 vampire children and their undead father? There's something else, Nathaniel said, and his tone suggested that the worst revelation was yet to come. The others who are hunting us have begun to take an interest in you. Sarah's blood turned to ice water. What do you mean? You've been seen with my children too often. Your scent is on them and theirs on you. To other vampires, you appear to be either our ally or our food source. Either way, you're now a target. Marcus nodded grimly. We've sensed them watching. Not just us, but you as well. Following you home, learning your routines. Oh, God, Sarah whispered, the full horror of her situation finally sinking in. My apartment, my job, my friends, all potentially compromised, Nathaniel confirmed. I'm sorry, Sarah. This was never my intention. I had hoped to relocate my children quietly without involving any humans, but they had already formed an attachment to you that made leaving difficult. Elena squeezed Sarah's hand. We didn't want to lose you. You're the first person who's ever been kind to us without wanting something in return. Gabriel nodded earnestly. You're like family to us now. Real family. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. In trying to help 3 homeless children, she had unknowingly entangled herself in a supernatural conflict that could cost her everything, possibly including her life. But looking at the 3 young faces watching her with such hope and affection, she found that she couldn't bring herself to regret her choices. What do we do? She asked finally. Nathaniel's smile was both grateful and predatory. We run. Tonight. I have a safe house prepared several hundred miles from here, but we'll need your help with the human documentation required to travel without raising suspicions. Tonight? Sarah's voice rose in panic. I can't just disappear tonight. I have responsibilities, a job, a life. You had a life, Nathaniel corrected gently but firmly. As of this evening, that life is no longer safe for you to inhabit. The others will move soon, and when they do, they will not distinguish between my family and anyone we care about. The weight of this new reality settled on Sarah like a physical burden. Everything she had worked for, everyone she knew, would have to be left behind because she had chosen to feed hungry children who happened to be something other than human. I need to go home, she said, standing up abruptly. I need to think about this. Nathaniel rose as well, his movement fluid and predatory. I'm afraid that's not possible. Your apartment is being watched even now. If you return there, you'll be walking into a trap. Then what am I supposed to do? Sarah demanded, her voice breaking with stress and fear. Trust us, Marcus said simply. We know it's asking a lot, but we'll protect you the same way you protected us. Gabriel tugged at her sleeve. We have clothes and things for you already. Father brought them. Sarah looked around the group in amazement. You've been planning this. All of it. You knew I'd get pulled into your world whether I wanted to or not. I hoped you wouldn't, Nathaniel said, and for the first time she heard genuine regret in his voice. But yes, I prepared for the possibility. I've had to make many difficult choices to keep my children safe. Involving you was one I hoped to avoid, but my children's attachment to you made it inevitable. The children watched Sarah with anxious expressions, clearly afraid that she might reject them now that she understood the full scope of what being part of their lives would mean. Sarah, Elena said quietly, if you stay with us, you'll be in danger. But if you try to go back to your old life, you'll be in even more danger. At least with us, you'll have protection. What kind of protection? Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. The kind that comes with becoming part of our family permanently, Nathaniel said. The kind that requires a more fundamental change than simply moving to a new city. Sarah's knees went weak as the implication hit her. You're talking about turning me. Not immediately, Nathaniel assured her quickly. The transformation is irreversible and should never be undertaken lightly. But eventually, if you choose to stay with us, it may become necessary for your long-term survival. The children watched her with desperate hope, and Sarah realized that they had already come to think of her as a permanent part of their family. In their innocent way, they saw her potential transformation not as a loss of humanity, but as a gain of eternal connection to them. I need time to process this, Sarah said, sitting back down heavily on the bench. This is all happening too fast. Time is a luxury we don't have, Nathaniel said, though his tone remained gentle. The others will expect us to run the moment they revealed their presence by watching you. Every moment we delay gives them a chance to intercept us. As if to emphasize his point, Marcus suddenly stiffened and turned toward the street. Father, they're coming. I can smell them. Elena and Gabriel immediately moved closer to Sarah, their childish demeanor replaced by something fierce and protective. Nathaniel stepped in front of the group, his entire body tensing for conflict. How many? He asked quietly. 3, maybe 4, Marcus replied, his young voice deadly serious. They're trying to mask their scent, but they're not very good at it. Sarah looked around in growing panic. What do we do? Should we call the police? Human authorities can't help us with this, Nathaniel said, his voice taking on a commanding tone. Sarah, get in your car. Drive to the address I'm about to give you. Don't stop for anything. Don't go anywhere else first. "What about you and the children?" she asked, though she was already moving toward her Honda. "We'll follow shortly," Gabriel said, and the confidence in his 8-year-old voice was both reassuring and terrifying. "We're harder to catch than we look." Nathaniel pressed a piece of paper into Sarah's hand. "This address. Go there now. If we're not there within an hour, keep driving south until you reach the state line." "I'm not leaving you," Sarah protested, even as she unlocked her car door. "Yes, you are," Elena said firmly. "Because we're not just children anymore, Sarah. We're predators too, and we can protect ourselves better if we're not worried about protecting you." The truth of this statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. These children she had been trying to save were far more dangerous than anything stalking them through the city streets. The only reason she needed protection was because she was human and vulnerable. "Go," Nathaniel ordered, and there was no arguing with the authority in his voice. "Now." Sarah got into her car and started the engine, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the steering wheel. As she pulled away from the curb, she saw in her rearview mirror that Nathaniel and the children had melted back into the shadows between the buildings, disappearing so completely that it was as if they had never been there at all. She drove through the snowy streets in a state of terror and disbelief, checking her mirrors constantly for signs of pursuit. The address Nathaniel had given her led to a modest house in a residential neighborhood 20 minutes across town. As she parked in the driveway, she realized that this moment marked the end of her normal life. Whatever happened next, she could never go back to being Sarah Martinez, social worker, who lived alone and spent her evenings helping homeless children. That woman was gone, replaced by someone whose life was now inextricably connected to creatures of legend and nightmare. She sat in her car outside the safe house and waited, praying that Marcus, Elena, Gabriel, and their supernatural father would arrive safely. Because somewhere in the span of a few short hours, they had stopped being her clients and started being her family, even if accepting that family might mean giving up her humanity forever. Sarah waited in her car for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes before she saw movement in the shadows around the house. Nathaniel appeared first, materializing from the darkness like smoke given form. The children followed, their movements as silent and fluid as their father's. Relief flooded through Sarah as she realized they had all escaped whatever confrontation had occurred at the library. "Come inside," Nathaniel said quietly as she got out of her car. "We have much to discuss and very little time." The safe house was modest but comfortable, furnished with antique pieces that seemed to span several centuries. Sarah noticed immediately that all the windows were covered with heavy curtains and there were no mirrors anywhere in sight. The children settled themselves on a large sofa while Nathaniel gestured for Sarah to take a chair nearby. "What happened back there?" she asked immediately. "Did they find you?" Marcus answered, his young face grim. "They tried to surround us, but we were ready for them. Father sent them a message they won't soon forget." "No one was destroyed," Nathaniel clarified, seeing Sarah's alarmed expression. "But they understand now that my family is under my protection and that I will not hesitate to defend what is mine." Elena curled up next to Gabriel on the couch, and Sarah was struck again by how young they appeared despite their supernatural nature. "Will they leave us alone now?" "For a time," Nathaniel replied. "But this is only a temporary reprieve. They will regroup and return with greater numbers, which is why we must leave Portland tonight." Sarah felt her last connection to her normal life slipping away. "Where will we go? I have properties in several states," Nathaniel explained. "Remote locations where we can remain hidden while I deal with this threat permanently." "Deal with it how?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know. Nathaniel's smile was cold and predatory, the same way I've dealt with threats to my family for over 300 years. "Permanently." The casual mention of his age sent chills through Sarah. 300 years. She was sitting in a room with beings who had lived through centuries of human history, who remembered times and places that existed now only in books. "How old are the children really?" she asked. "We were turned in 1972, Gabriel said matter-of-factly. "I was 8, Elena was 10, Marcus was 12, so we've been this age for over 50 years now." Sarah tried to wrap her mind around the concept of children who had been children for half a century, who possessed the accumulated knowledge and experience of adults trapped in young bodies. "Why were you turned so young?" she asked gently. The children exchanged glances, and Elena answered quietly. "We were dying. Car accident. Our parents were killed instantly, but we lingered for days in the hospital. Father found us there. I was working as a doctor at the time," Nathaniel explained. "I had been trying to live among humans, to resist my nature by helping rather than harming. When I saw 3 innocent children dying slowly and painfully, I couldn't stand by and do nothing." Marcus nodded. "He saved us the only way he could, by giving us his blood and his curse." "It's not a curse," Gabriel protested with the indignation of a child, though his words carried the weight of decades of experience. "It's a gift. We're still together. We're still a family. We've been alive for 50 years instead of dying at 8 and 10 and 12. Sarah found herself moved by the love evident between this unconventional family. Whatever Nathaniel had done, whatever moral boundaries he had crossed in turning these children, he had genuinely saved them and raised them with care and affection. "What about their original families?" she asked. "Gone," Elena said sadly. "We were the only survivors of the accident. No other relatives came forward to claim us. We were truly orphans when Father found us." "I gave them a choice," Nathaniel said, his voice defensive. "Even dying, even in pain, I explained what the transformation would mean. They chose to live, to stay together as a family. And we've never regretted it," Marcus said firmly. "Not once." Sarah believed them. Despite everything she had learned about their supernatural nature, she could see that these children had been loved and protected. Nathaniel might be a vampire, but he was also genuinely a devoted father. "What happens to me now?" she asked, the question that had been weighing on her mind since their escape from the library. "That depends on what you want," Nathaniel replied. "I can arrange for you to disappear into a new identity, far from Portland and far from us. You could start over, build a new life somewhere safe. Away from all of you," Sarah said, and the thought of losing the children sent an unexpected pang through her heart. "Yes," Gabriel said softly, "but you'd be safe. You'd be human. You could have the normal life you had before you met us." Sarah looked around at the 4 faces watching her with various degrees of hope and resignation. She realized that somewhere in the past few months these strange supernatural beings had become more important to her than the conventional life she would be giving up. "And if I chose to stay with you, then eventually you would need to become like us," Elena said quietly. "Humans age and die. We don't. If you wanted to truly be part of our family forever, you would need to accept the transformation." "How long would I have to decide?" "Years," Nathaniel assured her. "The immediate concern is simply keeping you alive and safe while I eliminate the current threat. The question of transformation is one for the distant future." Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would determine the course of the rest of her existence. "I want to stay with you, all of you." The relief and joy on the children's faces was immediate and overwhelming. Gabriel launched himself from the couch to hug her, followed quickly by Elena and Marcus. Even Nathaniel smiled, though his expression remained cautious. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Once we leave tonight, there will be no going back to your old life. Your identity as Sarah Martinez will have to die completely." "I'm sure," Sarah said, surprised by how certain she felt. "These children need me and I need them. Whatever that means for my future, I can accept it." "Then we need to prepare you for what comes next," Nathaniel said, his tone becoming businesslike. "First, you'll need a new identity. I have documents prepared for Sarah Collins, a teacher from California who has no family or close connections." He handed her a manila envelope containing a driver's license, social security card, and other identification documents that looked completely legitimate. "How did you get these so quickly?" "I've had centuries to develop useful connections," Nathaniel replied with a slight smile. "Money and the right contacts can accomplish a great deal. Second, you'll need to understand our lifestyle and limitations. We travel only at night. Sunlight isn't fatal to us, as folklore suggests, but it's extremely uncomfortable and weakens our abilities. We'll be moving frequently for the next several months, staying in safe houses and remote properties. Sarah nodded, trying to absorb all the practical implications of her decision. Third, and most importantly, you need to understand that the children, despite their apparent ages, are not human children. They have supernatural strength, speed, and senses. They don't sleep as humans do. They require blood to survive, though they've learned to subsist on animal sources. Marcus stepped forward. We'll protect you, Sarah. You don't need to be afraid of us. I'm not afraid of you? Sarah realized with surprise that this was true. Should I be? No, Nathaniel said firmly. We've lived peacefully among humans for decades. We've learned control and discipline. But you should understand that we are predators by nature, and there may be situations where that nature becomes apparent. Over the next few hours, as they prepared to leave the safe house, Sarah learned more about vampire physiology and psychology than she had ever imagined possible. The children demonstrated their enhanced abilities with casual ease, moving with inhuman speed and lifting furniture that should have been far too heavy for their apparent ages. Will I be able to do these things if I'm transformed? She asked. Eventually, Elena said, but it takes time to develop full control. New vampires are often clumsy and unpredictable for the first few years. Years? Sarah's voice squeaked slightly. Gabriel giggled, the sound perfectly normal and childlike despite everything else about their situation. Ha! Don't worry, Father is a very good teacher. He helped us learn everything we needed to know. As dawn approached, they loaded Sarah's belongings and essential supplies into 2 cars. Nathaniel would drive one vehicle with Elena and Gabriel, while Sarah would follow in her Honda with Marcus as her passenger and guide. Where are we going? Sarah asked as they prepared to leave. Montana initially, Nathaniel replied. I have a ranch there that's completely isolated. We can stay there while I make arrangements for a more permanent solution to our current problems. What kind of arrangements? Nathaniel's expression grew dark. The kind that involve ensuring our enemies no longer have the ability to threaten my family. The drive to Montana took 2 days, traveling only during nighttime hours and staying in motels during the day. Sarah found herself adjusting more quickly than she had expected to the nocturnal lifestyle. Marcus proved to be excellent company, regaling her with stories of their travels over the decades and the various historical events he had witnessed. Do you miss being fully human? Sarah asked him during one of their late-night conversations on the road. Marcus considered the question seriously. I don't really remember being human well enough to miss it. I was only 12 when I was turned, and that was over 50 years ago. This is the only life I've really known. Do you ever think about what you would have been if you hadn't been turned? Sometimes, he admitted. But then I think about how Elena and Gabriel and I would have died in that hospital and how we would have missed all the wonderful things we've experienced since then. How we would never have met Father or you. Sarah felt a warm glow at being included in his list of wonderful experiences. What's the best thing about being a vampire? Never having to say goodbye forever. Marcus replied without hesitation. Humans lose people they love all the time because life is so short. But we can stay together as a family for centuries, maybe forever. That's worth any sacrifice. When they finally reached the Montana ranch, Sarah was amazed by the property's isolation and beauty. The house was large and comfortable, situated in a valley surrounded by mountains and accessible only by a long private road. There were no neighbors for miles in any direction. This will be home for a while, Nathaniel announced as they carried their belongings inside. Sarah, you can have the master bedroom. The children and I don't require traditional sleep accommodations. Over the following weeks, Sarah settled into a routine unlike anything she had ever experienced. She slept during the day while the children rested in various dark corners of the house. Evenings were spent in family activities, reading, conversation, exploring the vast property, and learning about vampire culture and abilities. The children began teaching her basic self-defense techniques modified for someone with human limitations but designed to be effective against supernatural threats. If you're going to be part of our world, you need to be able to protect yourself, Elena explained as she demonstrated a movement that looked like dancing but was actually a lethal combat technique. Do you really think I could fight a vampire? Sarah asked skeptically. You don't need to win, Gabriel said with 8-year-old wisdom that carried the weight of decades. You just need to survive long enough for us to help you. Nathaniel spent his days making phone calls and sending encrypted messages, tracking down their enemies and making plans that he didn't share with the family. Sarah could see the stress of leadership wearing on him, the burden of protecting his unusual family while dealing with threats that could destroy them all. One evening, about a month after their arrival in Montana, Nathaniel returned from a trip to town with news that would change everything once again. It's finished, he announced, his voice carrying a mixture of relief and something darker. The threats have been eliminated permanently. The children looked up from their books and games with expressions of cautious hope. All of them? Marcus asked. All of them, Nathaniel confirmed. We're safe to resume normal life, or at least as normal as life can be for our kind. Sarah felt a complex mixture of emotions, relief that the danger was over, but also a disturbing realization of what eliminating threats permanently had likely entailed. What happens now? She asked. Now we decide where we want to live, Elena said excitedly. Father, can we stay here? I love the mountains. Gabriel nodded enthusiastically. And Sarah loves it too. Don't you, Sarah? Sarah looked around at the family that had become the center of her world and realized that location didn't matter nearly as much as being together. I love wherever you all are. Nathaniel smiled, the first truly relaxed expression she had seen from him in weeks. Then we'll make this our permanent home. I'll arrange for Sarah's new identity to be established in the local community. She can work as a teacher at the small school in town if she wishes. A teacher, Sarah mused. I suppose that's not too different from social work. You'll be helping children again, Marcus pointed out. Just normal human children this time. Sarah laughed at the irony. After months of caring for vampire children who appeared human, she would now be caring for human children while living with vampires. Her life had become a complicated balance of truth and deception, normal and supernatural. That night, as the family gathered around the fireplace for one of their evening conversations, Gabriel crawled into Sarah's lap with the same trusting affection he had shown since the beginning. Sarah, he said quietly, are you happy with us? Really happy? Yes, sweetheart, she replied, stroking his auburn curls. I'm happier than I've ever been. Even though we're monsters? Elena asked, her ancient child's eyes searching Sarah's face for any hint of revulsion or fear. Sarah looked around at these 3 beautiful, dangerous, loving children and their devoted father who had killed to protect his family, and felt nothing but overwhelming affection and belonging. You're not monsters, she said firmly. You're my family, the best family I've ever had. Marcus grinned, showing those sharp canine teeth that no longer seemed threatening, but simply part of who he was. Does that mean you'll let Father transform you someday? So we can be together forever? Sarah looked at Nathaniel, who was watching her with cautious hope. The question of transformation was no longer a distant theoretical possibility, but an immediate and practical consideration. If she truly wanted to be part of this family, to watch over these children for centuries rather than decades, she would need to make the ultimate commitment. Someday, she said, surprised by how certain she felt, when I'm ready and when the time is right. We have forever to wait, Nathaniel said softly. There's no rush. Elena clapped her hands with delight. We'll really be sisters then, real sisters for eternity. Gabriel hugged Sarah tighter. You'll never have to leave us, and we'll never have to leave you. Sarah closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of her chosen family around her. The crackling fire, the children's excited chatter about their eternal future together, Nathaniel's quiet contentment as he watched over his expanded brood. 6 months ago, she had been a lonely social worker whose greatest satisfaction came from helping homeless children. Now she was part of a supernatural family that challenged everything she thought she knew about good and evil, human and monster, mortality and eternity. She had given food to 3 ignored children, not knowing that their father was watching from the shadows. In trying to save them, she had instead been saved herself, rescued from a life of solitary service and given something she had never dared to hope for, a family that would love her forever. The transformation from human to vampire would come eventually, when she was ready to make the final commitment to this strange new existence. But the transformation from lonely individual to beloved family member was already complete. As Gabriel fell asleep in her arms and Elena and Marcus settled in for an evening of reading, and Nathaniel began planning improvements to their mountain home, Sarah realized that she had found her true calling at last. Not as a social worker helping strangers, but as a mother and protector to 3 extraordinary children who had waited 50 years for someone to see past their supernatural nature to the innocent souls beneath. She had fed their bodies when they were hungry, but they had fed her soul when it was starving for connection and purpose. In the end, it was impossible to say who had really saved whom. All that mattered was that they were together, they were safe, and they had forever to continue loving each other. In a world full of uncertainty and loss, that was the most precious gift of all. Outside their mountain refuge, the snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, a family that had found each other against all odds settled in for another peaceful evening, content in the knowledge that no force on earth or beyond could separate them now. Sarah Martinez, the social worker, was gone forever, but Sarah Collins, the vampire family's eternal guardian, was just beginning her true life's work, and she had never been happier. He gave food to the ignored children, not knowing the Vampire King, their true father, was watching from the shadows.